Victor Reinhardt's beer mug exploded against the wooden floor as the entire Roadhouse Tavern fell into dead silence. 3 minutes earlier, he and his crew had cornered what they thought was an easy target in the back corner booth. Now her phone buzzed with an incoming call that made every person in the bar freeze. Fort Bragg, classified. The woman in faded jeans didn't even flinch as military terminology crackled through the speaker. But the 5 bikers surrounding her table suddenly looked like they'd walked into the wrong fight. Stories like these remind us that courage comes in unexpected forms, and sometimes the people we overlook carry the heaviest burdens. I'd love to hear about a time you witnessed someone surprise everyone with their hidden strength. Share your story in the comments below because these real experiences connect us all. If these stories of quiet heroes touch your heart and you'd like to help us bring more inspiring tales to people who need to hear them, consider hitting the thanks button below. Your support helps us research and share these powerful human stories that deserve to be told. The amber neon signs of Roadhouse Tavern cast dancing shadows across worn leather and polished chrome as Isabel DuPont pushed through the heavy oak doors at exactly 10:15 p.m. The smell hit her immediately. Stale beer mixed with cigarette smoke and the lingering aroma of fried food that had soaked into every surface over decades of late-night gatherings. Classic rock pounded from speakers mounted in the corners. But the music couldn't quite mask the underlying tension that always seemed to simmer just beneath the surface in places like this. She moved through the crowded interior with practiced efficiency, her worn combat boots making almost no sound against the scarred wooden floor. Her route took her past the long mahogany bar where Liam Fletcher, the bartender, nodded in recognition. She'd been coming here twice a week for 8 months now, always ordering the same thing, always sitting in the same corner booth, always leaving exact change plus some modest tip. To the regulars, she was just another night shift worker unwinding after a hard day, someone unremarkable enough to blend into the background noise of their conversations. What they didn't notice was how her eyes swept the room with methodical precision, cataloging exits and potential threats with the automatic awareness of someone whose survival had once depended on such observations. The corner booth, she claimed, wasn't chosen for privacy. It was a tactical position that provided clear sightlines to all entrances while keeping her back protected by solid wood paneling. Her faded denim jacket hung loose enough to conceal the subtle bulge of old equipment she still carried, and her long sleeves hid the parallel scars that ran from wrist to elbow, like a roadmap of violence survived. The encrypted communication device she pulled from her jacket pocket looked like an ordinary flip phone to casual observers. But the worn exterior disguised military-grade technology with satellite connectivity and tactical messaging capabilities originally designed for special operations in hostile environments. Advanced processors hidden beneath the simple casing could reach command centers worldwide, a capability that had saved her life more than once in places where normal cell towers were luxuries that didn't exist. She placed it on the scarred wooden table within easy reach, a habit so ingrained she performed it without conscious thought. Her notebook emerged next, its pages filled with what appeared to be random observations written in a shorthand that would mean nothing to anyone unfamiliar with military intelligence protocols. Tonight's entries included vehicle descriptions, license plate fragments, and behavioral patterns of the bar's regular customers. Information that seemed pointless, but had once been the difference between successful missions and catastrophic failures. The ritual of observation and documentation provided structure to civilian life that often felt chaotic compared to the clear hierarchies and defined objectives of military service. Isabel ordered her usual, a single beer that would last most of the evening, and settled into the familiar routine of watching without being watched. The tremor in her left hand became more pronounced when she was tired, nerve damage from shrapnel that had torn through muscle and sinew during her final deployment. The injury wasn't severe enough to qualify for full disability benefits, but it was permanent enough to serve as a constant reminder of the morning when everything changed. She flexed her fingers slowly, working through the stiffness that always accompanied long hours at the medical supply warehouse, where she worked night shifts, loading trucks, and updating inventory databases. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone who had once performed battlefield surgery under sniper fire now spent her nights counting bandages and restocking oxygen tanks. But the warehouse job came with benefits that mattered more than prestige, flexible hours, minimal social interaction, and supervisors who didn't ask questions about gaps in employment history or why she sometimes flinched at sudden loud noises. The transition from military service to civilian employment had been harder than any combat mission she'd ever completed. Her reflection in the bar's mirror showed a woman approaching 30 who looked older than her years. Blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that kept it away from her face during physical work. The face that stared back held no trace of the warrior she'd once been, just the exhausted features of someone grinding through another day in a life that felt simultaneously too quiet and overwhelmingly chaotic. Civilian problems seemed both trivial and impossible to solve. Paying rent required different skills than neutralizing enemy positions, and navigating workplace politics proved more challenging than surviving firefights. The first signs of trouble arrived in the form of motorcycle engines growing louder the tavern windows. Isabel's training kicked in automatically, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly as she identified the sound patterns and estimated the number of vehicles. 5 bikes, all high-displacement Harleys approaching information, rather than the random arrival of individual riders. The sound cut through the bar's ambient noise like a blade, causing conversations to pause as heads turned toward the windows. Even in civilian settings, her brain continued processing tactical information with the same methodical efficiency that had once kept her alive in hostile territory. The tavern's atmosphere shifted as the engine shut down in sequence outside. Regular customers exchanged glances that spoke of previous encounters with groups who rode in formation and made their presence known through volume and intimidation. Liam Fletcher's hand moved closer to the phone behind the bar, though he made no move to actually call for help. In places like Roadhouse Tavern, problems were usually handled internally, and involving outside authorities was considered a last resort that could create more complications than it solved. Isabel watched the front doors with the same focused attention she'd once reserved for monitoring known enemy infiltration routes. Her breathing became deeper and more controlled, falling into the tactical rhythm that prepared her body for potential violence, while keeping her mind clear for decision-making. The beer in front of her remained untouched as her left hand moved to rest near the communication device, thumb positioned over the speed dial that connected to numbers most civilians didn't know existed. The doors swung open with enough force to rattle the frame, bringing with them the smell of motor oil and leather mixed with the particular brand of masculine aggression that announced itself through posture and volume. 5 men entered in formation that spoke of practiced intimidation, their presence immediately dominating the space as conversations died and attention focused on their arrival. They wore the uniform of their subculture, leather vests, decorated with patches that told stories of allegiances and achievements, heavy boots that made each step an announcement, and the kind of swagger that came from years of getting their way through the simple application of superior size and numbers. Victor Reinhardt led the group with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the biggest presence in any room. At 6'4" and carrying the kind of muscle mass that spoke of both genetics and dedication to physical intimidation, he commanded attention through sheer presence. His graying beard framed a face that had learned to enjoy the discomfort his appearance caused in others, and his pale eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone who understood how to use fear as a tool. The Confederate flag patches on his vest were positioned where they couldn't be missed, statements of identity that served as both armor and weapon in social encounters. Behind him came Luca Bianchi, whose military bearing was still visible despite years of civilian life and bitter disappointment. The failed soldier carried himself with the rigid posture of someone trying to project authority he'd never actually earned. His discharge from basic training, a source of shame that had transformed into aggressive overcompensation. His eyes swept the room with what he believed was tactical awareness, but Isabel recognized it as the amateur mimicry of someone who'd watched war movies and believed they understood combat. Gunnar Olsen filled doorways and dominated spaces through simple physical mass, 350 pounds of muscle and fat distributed across a frame that seemed designed for intimidation. His presence was less about technique and more about the primal human response to being confronted by something larger and potentially more dangerous. Felix Ruiz brought youth and eagerness to prove himself worthy of inclusion in the group, his nervous energy barely contained as he waited for opportunities to demonstrate his commitment to their shared identity. Rolf Wagner completed their formation as the silent enforcer, a man whose criminal record spoke louder than words and whose reputation preceded him through whispered warnings among those who knew better than to challenge him directly. They claimed territory near the center of the tavern with the casual entitlement of apex predators. Their conversation loud enough to serve as performance for the other customers, tales of recent rides and planned modifications to their motorcycles, mixed with complaints about law enforcement and celebrations of their own perceived superiority. The regular customers responded with the practiced invisibility of prey animals, avoiding eye contact while remaining hyper-aware of potential escalation. Isabel continued her observations from the corner booth, noting movement patterns and group dynamics with the same analytical detachment she'd once applied to enemy force assessments. The leader need for constant validation, the failed soldier's overcompensation, the big man's reliance on physical intimidation, the young one's desperate need for approval, and the silent one's barely contained potential for violence. All predictable patterns that could be managed if necessary. The collision happened at exactly 10:37 p.m. as Isabel returned from the bathroom, her path intersecting with Victor's trajectory toward the bar in a moment of simple physics that transformed into something far more complicated. Her shoulder caught his elbow as he gestured expansively during a story about territorial disputes with rival groups, causing his beard to splash across his leather vest in a cascade of amber liquid that darkened the material and triggered an immediate escalation in tension. The silence that followed was absolute, as if someone had thrown a switch that killed every conversation in the tavern simultaneously. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs, creating a vacuum of sound that amplified the significance of the moment. Every eye in the establishment focused on the corner where liquid dripped from expensive leather onto worn wooden floor, and Isabel found herself at the center of attention in exactly the way her training had taught her to avoid. "Watch where you're going, sweetheart." Victor's voice carried easily through the suddenly quiet space, pitched to reach every customer and establish the narrative before anyone else could speak. "This vest costs more than your monthly rent, and now you've ruined it with your clumsy little accident." The words hung in the air like smoke, creating the foundation for whatever would follow. Other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, torn between the human instinct to help someone in trouble and the equally powerful desire to avoid becoming targets themselves. Liam Fletcher's hand moved toward the phone again, but his expression showed the calculation of someone weighing risks against probable outcomes. In his experience, intervention often made situations worse, and 5 against 1 weren't odds that encouraged heroism from bystanders. Isabel's response came in the measured tone of someone practiced at de-escalation, her voice carrying none of the fear or anger that might have justified further aggression. "I apologize for the spill. I can arrange to pay for dry cleaning or replacement if necessary." The offer was reasonable, delivered without challenge or provocation, exactly the kind of response that should have diffused tension and allowed everyone to return to their evening without further incident. But reasonableness wasn't what Victor wanted. The attention of the entire tavern was focused on him now, and his reputation among his crew depended on maintaining the image of someone who didn't accept disrespect from anyone, especially not from a small woman who dared to interfere with his evening. The group dynamics that held his leadership position together required him to escalate rather than de-escalate, to transform an accident into an opportunity for demonstration, dry cleaning. Gunner's voice rumbled with manufactured outrage as he positioned himself to block Isabel's path back to her booth. "This is custom leather, girl. You can't just throw something like this in a machine and hope it comes out right." His massive frame created an effective barrier, while his words provided justification for a continued confrontation. The classic pattern of manufactured grievance that transformed minor incidents into major problems. Felix Ruiz stepped closer with the eager aggression of someone desperate to prove his worth to the group. His youth making him more dangerous because he had less experience reading situations and more need to establish his credentials through action rather than wisdom. Maybe she should learn some respect for other people's property before she goes stumbling around like a drunk. Luca Bianchi studied Isabel with the intensity of someone trying to place a face or recognize a pattern. His failed military experience giving him just enough knowledge to sense something unusual about her bearing without being able to identify exactly what he was seeing. "You served, didn't you?" His question cut through the general hostility with unexpected precision. "I can tell by the way you stand, the way you hold yourself. Let me guess, Army cook, Navy secretary, some kind of rear echelon support role, or you never saw any real action. The assumption stung not because it was insulting, but because it revealed how successfully she'd hidden her true background. The woman these men saw bore no resemblance to the warrior she'd once been. And that transformation represented both survival and loss in ways they couldn't begin to understand. Her fingers moved unconsciously to touch the communication device on her table. Muscle memory activated by stress and the growing certainty that this situation would require more than apologies and offers of compensation to resolve. The five men formed a loose circle around her booth. Now their positioning casual enough to avoid obvious threats while effectively trapping her in the corner. The psychological pressure was carefully applied enough to intimidate without crossing legal lines, sufficient to establish dominance without providing justification for outside intervention. It was a practice routine that had worked countless times before against targets who lacked the training or confidence to resist. But as Isabel's thumb moved to hover over a specific button on her communication device, something in her demeanor began to shift in ways too subtle for untrained observers to detect. The trigger came when Victor's patience finally snapped. His massive hand shot across the table and clamped around Isabel's wrist with enough force to leave bruises, his fingers encountering the medical alert bracelet she wore beneath her sleeve. The unusual codes etched into the metal caught his attention for a split second before his focus returned to intimidation. Maybe you didn't hear me clearly the first time, sweetheart. We're talking about serious money here, and I don't think you understand the gravity of your situation. Isabel's response came in a voice that remained unnaturally calm despite the physical contact. I need to make one phone call. The words were spoken with the kind of professional detachment that should have been impossible under the circumstances, carrying an undertone that made several nearby customers look up from their drinks with sudden interest. Victor's laugh boomed through the tavern, designed to play to his audience and reinforce the narrative of dominance he was carefully constructing. What? Calling your boyfriend? Maybe dialing 911? His grip tightened as he leaned forward with theatrical menace. Let me save you some time, honey. Police don't make house calls to Roadhouse Tavern. And even if they did, you'd be in a world of hurt long before they got here. The entire bar had gone silent now, conversations dying mid-sentence as patrons recognized the escalation happening in real time. Liam Fletcher moved closer to his end of the bar, torn between his instinct to intervene and his knowledge that 5 against 1 weren't odds that encouraged heroism. Pool cues stopped clicking. Dart games paused mid-throw, and even the jukebox seemed to sense the tension as it finished its current song without immediately starting another. Isabel's thumb moved to a specific button on her communication device with practiced precision, muscle memory guiding her to the speed dial that connected to numbers most civilians didn't know existed. The encryption protocols activated automatically as the call connected, establishing a secure link to a facility that officially didn't exist on any public directory. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the suddenly quiet tavern with professional clarity that transformed the atmosphere instantly. Command, this is Phantom 6, code yellow situation inside civilian establishment. The words cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk, each syllable delivered with the clinical precision of someone accustomed to life or death communications. The military terminology was unmistakable, spoken with the kind of casual familiarity that only came from years of operational experience. The response crackled through the speaker with crystal clarity, loud enough for everyone within 15 foot to hear every word. Phantom 6, this is Overwatch. Confirm your status and location. The voice belonged to someone clearly accustomed to command authority, speaking with the efficiency of trained professionals who dealt with crisis situations as routine business. The immediate reaction was electric. Conversations that had already died now became absolute silence as every person in the tavern strained to listen to something they'd never experienced before. Liam Fletcher froze mid-pour, amber liquid overflowing from the glass as his attention focused completely on the unfolding drama. Regular customers exchanged glances filled with confusion and growing excitement, while others pulled out phones to record what they sensed was becoming something extraordinary. 5 hostile civilians confined space situation, Roadhouse Tavern, Main Street. Isabel's voice remained steady as she provided coordinates with the same tone she might have used to order coffee, harassment escalating to potential assault. Her eyes never left Victor's face as she spoke, watching his expression cycle through confusion, disbelief, and the first hint of genuine concern. Copy, Phantom 6. We have your GPS beacon. Interior location confirmed. Are you trapped? The professional concern in the voice was unmistakable, carrying the weight of resources being mobilized and decisions being made at levels far above local law enforcement. Gunnar Olsen's massive frame shifted nervously as the implications of what he was hearing began to penetrate his alcohol-fogged consciousness. Felix Ruiz looked around the bar with growing unease, suddenly aware that their routine intimidation had taken an unexpected turn into territory none of them understood. Even Rolf Wagner, usually the most composed member of their group, showed signs of uncertainty as military terminology filled the air around them. Negative immediate physical threat, but subjects unaware of federal protection protocols. Isabel's response carried an undertone that made several bar patrons gasp audibly. The phrase federal protection landed like a bomb in the confined space, transforming what had seemed like a simple bar confrontation into something that carried serious legal implications. Luca Bianchi's military training, limited as it was, provided just enough knowledge for him to recognize authentic protocol when he heard it. His face went pale as pieces began falling into place. His earlier assumptions about her background crumbling under the weight of evidence he couldn't deny. Federal protection, he whispered more to himself than anyone else. What the hell is going on here? Multiple subjects confirmed on thermal imaging. Do civilians require education on harassment statutes for decorated veterans? The voice from the phone carried an edge that suggested resources were being deployed and decisions made that would have consequences extending far beyond the tavern's walls. The words decorated veterans hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Someone near the pool table dropped their cue with a clatter that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Liam Fletcher sat down his bar towel and moved closer, his expression showing the kind of respect that came automatically when confronted with genuine military service. Regular customers began whispering among themselves, the narrative they constructed about the quiet woman in the corner booth disintegrating as new information reshaped their understanding. QRF spinning up, ETA 9 minutes. Local law enforcement notified, federal observers inbound. The calm efficiency of the response suggested coordination at levels that civilian law enforcement couldn't match, resources being deployed with the kind of precision that only came from military organization. Victor's grip on Isabel's wrist loosened involuntarily as the full implications of the situation began to dawn on him. Quick reaction force wasn't terminology that appeared in civilian contexts, and the casual way it was deployed suggested capabilities that went far beyond local police response. His carefully constructed dominance was evaporating as forces beyond his comprehension mobilized in response to what he'd assumed was a simple intimidation session. QRF, Felix Ruiz's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. That's quick reaction force, isn't it? Military response team. His youth made him more susceptible to the growing fear that was spreading through their group like wildfire, his bravado crumbling as the reality of their situation became clear. The background chatter coming through the phone speaker was becoming audible to most of the bar now. Fragments of conversation that painted a picture of coordinated response involving multiple agencies. Get me Fort Bragg on secure line. Patch through to Pentagon duty officer. Notify base commander immediately. Alert medical standby team. Each snippet added another layer to the growing understanding that this was not a situation that would be resolved through local channels. Isabel's voice cut through the mounting tension with professional calm as she continued her communication with Overwatch. Subjects appeared to be reconsidering their position situation, showing signs of de-escalation. Her clinical assessment of their changing behavior was delivered with the same detached efficiency she might have used to report weather conditions, but the underlying message was clear to anyone with the intelligence to understand it. Copy that. Phantom 6, maintain open line. Full response team remains inbound for debriefing and documentation. The response carried the weight of institutional authority, suggesting that regardless of how the immediate situation resolved, there would be consequences and follow-up that extended far beyond the current evening. By this point, the entire tavern had become an audience for drama none of them had expected when they'd arrived for their regular evening drinks. Phones were recording from multiple angles, capturing footage that would be shared across social media within minutes. The transformation from routine bar confrontation to federal incident was happening in real time, witnessed by dozens of people who would carry the story forward through their own networks. Rolf Wagner, who had maintained his threatening posture throughout the initial confrontation, now stepped back slightly as the implications became clear. Federal incident meant investigations, background checks, and scrutiny that none of them wanted. His criminal record made him particularly vulnerable to the kind of attention that federal involvement would bring, and his usual confidence was evaporating as quickly as his companions. Rolling up her sleeve revealed the truth that explained everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. The parallel scars running from wrist to elbow weren't random marks of accident or self-harm, but the precise pattern left by shrapnel from military ordnance. Her nerve damage required specialized medical equipment and pharmaceutical treatments, advanced therapeutic devices originally developed for combat trauma, but now available for civilian medical professionals who treated veterans dealing with similar injuries. The tremor in her left hand became more pronounced under stress, but the scars told a story of survival that commanded respect rather than pity. These came from Kandahar Province 2019 IED explosion during medical evacuation under enemy fire. Her voice carried the clinical detachment of someone recounting events that had been processed through years of therapy and official debriefing. I was the sole medic with a special operations unit that came under ambush during a humanitarian mission. The revelation landed like a physical blow to everyone within hearing distance. Luca Bianchi's face went ashen as his earlier mockery about rear echelon support roles came back to haunt him with devastating irony. Felix Ruiz actually took a step backward, his youth making him more susceptible to the shame of having threatened someone whose service record dwarfed anything he could imagine. Even Victor, who prided himself on never backing down from confrontation, found his certainty crumbling as the full scope of his mistake became apparent. Staff Sergeant Isabelle DuPont, 82nd Airborne Division, attached to Special Operations Command. The formal identification came not from Isabel, but from Liam Fletcher, who had moved close enough to read the dog tags that had become visible when she rolled up her sleeve. His voice carried the reverence of someone who understood military hierarchy and the significance of the decorations that were becoming apparent. The dog tags revealed more than just her name and unit designation. Medical specialty codes, blood type, and allergy information were standard. But the additional markings spoke of classifications and clearances that went far beyond conventional military service. Combat medic wings, paratrooper qualification, and specialty designators that most civilians wouldn't recognize, but that spoke volumes to anyone with military knowledge. Silver Star recipient, 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star, with Valor device. The voice of Overwatch came through the phone speaker again, this time addressing the assembled crowd rather than just Isabel. Credited with saving 11 American lives under direct enemy fire during a 72-hour period when her unit was cut off from support. The impact of this information on the bar's atmosphere was immediate and profound. The hostility that had filled the air moments before was replaced by something approaching awe, mixed with shame and the kind of respect that Americans reserved for genuine military heroes. Someone near the back of the tavern started clapping slowly, and others joined until the applause filled the space with the sound of recognition and regret. The sound of approaching vehicles became audible through the tavern's windows, multiple engines moving in coordination toward their location. Helicopter rotors added their distinctive rhythm to the growing symphony of response, while radio chatter became audible from the street as federal and local law enforcement established their perimeter and prepared for whatever they might encounter inside. Commander LeClaire entered the tavern like a force of nature, her dress uniform immediately commanding attention and respect from everyone present. The eagles on her shoulders caught the light from the neon signs, while the ribbons on her chest told stories of 3 decades in military service. Her bearing radiated the kind of authority that came from leading soldiers through impossible situations, and her presence immediately transformed the tavern from a civilian establishment into something approaching a military briefing room. "Staff Sergeant DuPont," she said, approaching Isabel's table with visible respect. "I apologize that it took this long for us to respond to your situation." Her words carried the weight of institutional recognition, acknowledgement that someone under federal protection should never have been placed in such circumstances. The formal address completed the transformation of everyone's understanding. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or exaggerated claims, But this was a documented military hero whose service record was being confirmed by active duty command personnel. The five bikers who had seemed so threatening minutes before now appeared diminished and foolish, their leather and patches seeming like costume jewelry compared to authentic military authority. Ladies and gentlemen, Commander LeClaire addressed the entire tavern, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the establishment. You've witnessed harassment of a Silver Star recipient who saved 11 American lives under enemy fire. Staff Sergeant DuPont spent 72 hours performing battlefield surgery while her position was under constant sniper fire, refusing evacuation until every wounded soldier under her care had been stabilized. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of radio communications and helicopter rotors. Every person in the tavern understood that they were in the presence of something extraordinary. Someone whose courage and sacrifice had kept American soldiers alive in circumstances most people couldn't imagine. The shame on the faces of the five bikers was visible and complete. Their earlier aggression transformed into the kind of remorse that came from recognizing a profound moral failure. Victor Reinhardt, who had led the harassment with such confidence, now stood with his head bowed, like a schoolchild being disciplined by a teacher. "Ma'am, Sergeant, we had no idea who you were, if we had known." His voice trailed off as he realized how inadequate any apology would be under the circumstances. "You didn't ask," Isabel replied, her voice holding no anger but carrying the weight of someone who had experienced this kind of judgment before. "You saw someone different and decided that made them a target. Maybe next time you'll think about what you don't know before you decide to hurt someone." The crowd of federal agents and military personnel that had assembled outside began filing into the tavern with professional efficiency, transforming the civilian space into something resembling a command post. Documentation began immediately, with statements being taken and video evidence being collected from the numerous phones that had recorded the confrontation. The legal implications were becoming clear to everyone involved, particularly the five men who had initiated the harassment. Liam Fletcher stepped forward with the kind of respect that came from genuine recognition of service and sacrifice. "Ma'am, on behalf of this establishment, I want to apologize for what happened here tonight. You drink free at Roadhouse Tavern for life, and anyone who has a problem with that can find somewhere else to spend their money." The sentiment was echoed by customers throughout the tavern, many approaching to offer apologies and express gratitude for her service. The transformation was complete. The quiet woman seen as an easy target was now recognized as exactly what she had always been, a genuine American hero who had earned respect through courage and sacrifice. As federal agents completed their documentation, Isabel found herself surrounded by a community that finally understood who she was. The isolation that had defined her civilian life began to dissolve as people shared their own military stories and gratitude for her service. The five bikers left quietly, their swagger replaced by subdued shame, understanding they had narrowly avoided serious federal charges. Their departure was barely noticed by a crowd more interested in celebrating someone who embodied the best of American military tradition. 6 months later, Roadhouse Tavern had become an unofficial gathering place for veterans seeking community. Isabel still occupied her corner booth twice weekly, but now surrounded by people who recognized her service. The phone calls to Overwatch had stopped, replaced by conversations with fellow veterans who understood the challenges of transitioning to civilian life. In that corner booth, surrounded by respect and gratitude, Staff Sergeant Isabel DuPont had finally found the peace that had eluded her since returning from 4.